Thanks again, Ivan and George, for having me, for inviting me. I hope I'm part of the September Volume 2 thing here as well. So I'm not sure about this, but I'd love to. There you go. Hey, welcome everyone. I don't have awesome music to kind of zoom in here and dance to, and I think if I would, I think it wouldn't land quite as well as Jacko can do this. So so for me, it's just going to be the voice audio here and a couple of slides. I do have some animations in the slides though, in order to try and maybe match a little bit of what Jacko did there. Yes, today I wanted to talk a little bit about something that I've been starting to talk about actually a lot, Agile GTM execution, Agile go-to-market execution. And really, this is a bit of an offspring of some of the things that I've seen on my journey. So, just maybe for folks that don't know me, I actually was lucky enough to start in a company super early on. Basically did revenue operations there. Didn't quite know at the time. So this was 2013 or something that I was doing RevOps at the time. And then through some, I don't know, magic, happy for folks to kind of ask me and kind of see how I can respond to that. Through some magic, went from revenue operations to chief revenue officer of the whole fucking thing. Was an amazing journey. Did this actually in the end twice, exited twice of those companies successfully. And I think what's a little bit different is that, I really took this RevOps perspective on revenue and kind of managing the whole revenue umbrella. So marketing, sales, and CS through a RevOps lens, right? And that's really where also some of this topic here is coming from, and some of the shared pains that I had back then, but also some of the shared pains that I'm seeing a lot in the market right now, right? And the subtitle really is, don't follow finance and the illusion of planning. You'll probably miss target and waste CAC. And really, the reason why I wanted to talk about this here today, and I have it a little bit later on in the deck as well. But again, even George, don't, maybe for the V2, really call it RevOps or die. I think it was a shame that went away in the end. I think we probably have some folks that were a bit, rattled by it. I wasn't. I think it's the exact right way to talk about it. But let's dive into it. By the way, I only have like half an hour or something like that. So we might or might not get to Q&A. But feel free to connect to me on LinkedIn and just send me your questions there. Happy to take it there. Yeah, wonderful. So where this really came up was, and this is a while back, and some of that got confirmed in between. A colleague and I, we were basically discussing, and maybe over a beer or two, why is it actually that we're always doing planning during Christmas? So why would you do that, right? So from a go-to-market perspective, from a revenue perspective, the Christmas period, or what leads up to that, sure, you have your holiday stuff, but you have your end of year, end of Q4, most important Q4, and all of that stuff happening at that point in time. Why would you actually engage in planning there? And the reason is that actually revenue would probably choose to not do planning there, but finance is doing planning there. And therefore, they're kicking off a whole process, down the line of like, okay, now we need the revenue number. Now we need to know how many you want to hire. We need to know all of those things. And for some reason, that basically then happens during Christmas in order to, get to their budget and their annual report and all of these things. And we are it's so ingrained in us that obviously, we do annual planning, and it happens in December or late December or whenever. And that's a normal thing. And the thing is, it's actually not a normal thing. You don't have to do it like that. It's a finance invention, and we're all just latching onto it and accepting it as the norm. And I think today I want to challenge some of that just a little bit. I've done that before, actually quite a lot. And let's see where some of you maybe land and maybe see similar ways and or kind of object to that. Yeah, I would love for people actually to object to some of the stuff that I'm saying, because then I'm learning. So what I'm seeing a lot, again, planning once a year happens all the time. There's usually a pure focus on financials. Yeah? And financials really in this sense, where we're going to land on the revenue side. Here are the costs that we have in order to, maybe support that, maybe not. But we really actually only need the revenue line item to make sure that we know how much money we are burning or if we're profitable in the end, right? That's really the reason why finance needs to understand that, right? Then usually in this process, you get this Excel spreadsheet with all the financial data in there, and then revenue operations is asked to kind of reverse engineer. It's like, we kind of need some funnel targets. How many opportunities do we need? How many leads do we need? And all of that stuff. And RevOps then sometimes comes up with, wait a minute, folks. You know, I can maybe kind of work with this budget here, but getting to that target line is really difficult, and I couldn't get there in the way that you designed this whole thing. Excuse me, I have some feedback here. And usually, you know, if, you know, maybe this is wonderful and different in your organization, but usually that doesn't actually get heard, right? There's a lot of like, sorry, the board kind of approved the rough thing already, and we really like what we kind of did here, so we kind of need to go with this budget and need to go ahead with that. What then results, though, is that, you know, one of our investors, Dave Kellogg, he actually calls it model-induced hallucination. Yeah, so you have your financial planning or your financial modeling, and then people start, you know, tweaking around on those conversion rate numbers, which then suddenly have a massive impact, right? Suddenly you go from like, you know, I'm not sure if we're going to hit, to, oh, wow, we actually now have a buffer, you know, on top of that, right? That usually is then, you know, matched with maybe overcommits or undercommits, can actually go into both directions. And at the same time, you know, as you then execute, actually finance doesn't actually want you to touch the budget. Usually it's a thing that's kind of locked in place. Usually it's a thing where people are saying like, you know what, we don't want to go back to the board. We don't want to open this thing up. We can't move budget around because otherwise we'll have all of those issues here. So we kind of need to lock it in place. And that basically leaves very little room for you to react during the year, right? And I mean, guess what? I'm not saying that's the sole reason or that's the only thing that's contributing to this, but it does end up with folks struggling to hit target, obviously ending up missing some of that, and then wasting CAC dollars in the process, right? And I think sometimes the relationship between those two things isn't fully understood. What I sometimes ask, you know, CFOs, and, you know, say like, hey, if you had known at the beginning of the year that you would only hit this revenue number at the end of the year, would you still have approved the CAC budget? And the answer will usually be no. No, we should have been going differently about it. We need to rethink the whole thing and so forth. So really what happens when you miss target is you have an expectation on CAC, how much you want to spend, and that suddenly doesn't work out anymore. And then you end up wasting CAC. And that is exactly what, you know, in this time of efficient growth that we simply can't afford anymore, right? Both missing target, and maybe people are a bit softer on that maybe right now, but wasting CAC dollars is one of the things that actually is very difficult to be okay with in the current period of time. And my belief is, and my perspective is, that actually revenue operations has a pretty big part to play here in order to try and fix this. You know, again, I'm a thought leader, I'm an influencer, I'm like all of those things, but I'm also not delusional in the way that I understand that that is not a thing that happens from one day to the next. I think this will take some time. I think in some organizations will go faster. I think in some organizations will be going a little bit slower. But at the end of the day, and this is really important, revenue operations has the chance to try and improve how companies are hitting targets, so making money, and has the chance to try and, you know, optimize how companies are spending money, so saving money, right? Those are the two things. Those are the two things that revenue operations needs to focus on. And if you don't, then, you know, it's, you know, sometimes people would say, well, then you're really only a system admin. And I think it's really important that we start thinking more and more about how can this organization make more money and, you know, potentially save on money. So where's all of this leading us, right? We're kind of, when we're doing the planning, when we're kind of going through this whole thing, we're kind of acting like we know the future, right? But the thing is, you know, and I think all of you have kind of seen this, we clearly actually don't know the future. And the way you can sometimes smell that that's actually the case is you have a budget for the year, obviously, you get to Q1 and you hit Q1. Fantastic, right? Everyone is happy about that. And I can tell you almost every organization is hitting Q1. What then happens, though, is that you miss Q2, you miss Q3, and those 2 quarters, you're like, we'll make it all back in Q4, don't you worry. And then you walk into Q4, and guess what? You're not making anything back, right? What this really means, if you think about it, what it really means is you have good visibility into the next 3 months, right? That's why you hit Q1. but you really have low visibility into the rest of the year. And that stems from that we simply don't know the future, and we especially don't know the future with all the moving parts, all the things that are changing all the time, right? And, you know, this is my little side caveat here. You know, that acting like we know the future is kind of created by people without real skin in the game. I'm not sure if everyone has read the book by Nassim Taleb, Skin in the Game. He's kind of the guy from the Black Swan. Anyway, you know, everyone is kind of reading this stuff. But in reality, you know, finance is doing some of the planning. Finance is locking in the future for a year. Finance is trying to kind of slim down the optionality of after that. But at the end of the day, it's, you know, and I was a CRO myself, it's not like the CFO gets fired when you don't hit the plan. It's usually the executing folks that are. And those are the ones, from my perspective, and RevOps is the closest to that have real skin in the game. So what I actually did, what we did actually in the team, and, you know, we kind of tested it with some of our customers, we basically went out and asked how people with skin in the game, how are they approaching this problem potentially differently? How are they going about this, that they cannot know the future, but they still need to be successful because maybe the stakes are much higher. You know, being fired is one thing, I don't know, dying is another, right? So we basically went into this like, okay, how do other people go about this? And obviously the first thing, and maybe dying was, maybe it was a bit too much here right now, but first thing was actually athletes. And I think this whole Mike Tyson quote thing, I'm getting tired of it myself, but it does hold true at the end of the day, right? Everyone has a plan until they get punched in the mouth. And the reality here is, right, if you kind of translate that to go-to-market, sure, you will have a plan until you get punched in the mouth, but then you need to change your plan, right? Mike Tyson doesn't write that, oh, and then you know, once you get punched in the face, you just keep doing your plan. No, he changes his plan, obviously, right? And that's a thing that's across the board with basically all the different athletes out there, right? If you look into soccer, if you look into football, if you look into, I'm actually from Europe, so I can call it football instead of soccer. But generally speaking, kind of, you need to adjust, you need to change, you need to see what's going on and you deal with that reality. And that's really what, you know, this eminent, very thoughtful Mike Tyson here was trying to convey to, I guess, all of us. But instead of only looking at athletes, we actually also looked a little bit further. We looked at the military. So, you know, maybe the metaphor from before is a bit more adept here, but they have something that they call the OODA loop. I don't want to talk too much about it. It's kind of boring, but basically they realize they go into some kind of a situation. They have kind of a plan, but they know nothing is going to go according to plan. So what you need to do is you need to, when things change, you need to observe, to orient, you need to decide, and then you need to act, right? Kind of very much, hey, we have a plan, but we don't know the future. We know things will happen in a way that we actually don't appreciate, but we will need to deal with it when that happens. And that means we need to change the plan when exactly that happens, right? And then the last, you know, thing that we looked into, and some of that might have been due to the awesome pictures we could choose, was engineering. Right? And if you say engineering and or product development, software development, all of that stuff, what have they been preaching now to us for, I don't know, a decade or two, right? They're talking about Agile all the time. They are spitting on this whole waterfall thing. They're saying, hey, you shouldn't be doing that. That's a stupid way to go about it. And I'm just sometimes wondering, you know, there are many things we should actually be learning from our colleagues on the product side. And especially for us on the revenue side, I think the agile mentality or the agile mindset, and you know what, I'm by no means a expert in agile. You know, you could probably grill me and probably falter here, but that idea of, okay, we need to deal with things as they come up. We have new situations all the time, and we need to reassess all the time what's going on. I think this is the exact same way we should be going about it on the go-to-market side. Yeah. So what does that actually mean, right? How would we now, you know, go into this and start mapping some of the agile concepts to the go-to-market side? So I really want to make sure that this is in the end tangible, and that you guys ideally can go off, take some of those pieces and try and implement them, you know, back home in your companies. So number one, we should be thinking about it not in terms of budgeting, but rather in terms of revenue road mapping. So I'm, you know, currently I'm also a CEO, and I'm dealing a lot with product and product development. I can tell you everything is always delayed. I think you probably have the same experiences, and that's okay. That's how product development works to a large degree. Probably other teams are much more on time than maybe we are. I don't know. But the idea is really to think about as a roadmap, right? And it's not just a, how much money do I have in a month? That's just the wrong way about it. It's like creating your product by saying, okay, we have 25 salaries and an Amazon Web Services cost and Snowflake cost. And that's not going to create our product. That's not how product goes about it. They're saying, okay, we have all of those resources, but what are those resources actually doing, right? And obviously they're, they're coding and features and all of that jazz. But in our case, on the go-to-market side, try and take some of those nuggets that the product team is using and try and, inherit them and try and reflect how you could actually kind of go about it. And here's some examples. Try and create a backlog, right? And that backlog could be different projects maybe you want to execute, so very much revenue operations focused. It could also be, hey, we believe we could hire 5 or 10 or 15 or 20 more folks on the sales team, maybe specifically SDR or AE. It can also be we want to hire someone else on the CS side, or we want to hire another RevOps person, or we want to, I don't know, kick off a campaign on the marketing side, right? Create that backlog of ideas of things that you actually want to do, and create that not in a silo, not somewhere in the corner where finance is doing, tweaking the spreadsheet. Create it with the subject matter experts that are sitting around the table right now and actually need to make those decisions. Then you can use some kind of ranking, but it's at the end of the day, it's really more kind of a way to discuss that backlog, right? So I don't want to get too technical. Some people use something called ICE. So impact, confidence, and effort. Yeah. And impact in this case should definitely be a revenue impact. So if I add an SDR in June, what's my revenue impact going to be for that thing, for that hire? And is it going to be higher or lower than, I don't know, doing something else here in the funnel? Again, I already mentioned this, collaborate with the team on this. And then the way you should be thinking about it. And that's also, this backlog should stay alive. It shouldn't be just done at the end of the day. You pull things into roadmap from backlog as you have capacity, as things screw up, as you learn something new, right? So revenue roadmap is number 1. Number 2, weekly check-ins. And this is really connected to, I think in the Agile world, people call it maybe daily stand-ups or something like that, shorter meetings, but high frequency. Instead of, the comparison here to the waterfall or the old school of doing it, it's really kind of this monthly budget review. Where it's like, well, you have so many people hired and your commissions are above, but your revenue is below. What's going on, Tony? And those weekly check-ins, and this is literally how I operated in most of the companies I worked at, was basically kind of build an operating cadence, right? And in this case, it's very much weekly focused for sure, but it's, have a demand gen meeting. So that would be with your VP marketing, with your VP of outbound, maybe you have a partnership person, maybe you have a PLG driven motion, and kind of bring all the people together that need to work on this top funnel piece. Because if someone is lagging behind, you can maybe tap into some other team in order to, equal this out and still hit your revenue target. Obviously, something around sales execution, I think everyone is doing that. That would be like a pipeline review or a forecasting session and so forth. Have a customer growth session, like figure out who is at risk, what can we do, who is maybe an opportunity to upsell. Have those conversations. And always when you have those conversations, have them in the backdrop of, is that what we expected? Is that actually where we wanted to go? Are we doing better or worse? And if we're doing worse, what are we going to do about it? And, those are just examples. You might have other pieces in your business that kind of map to that, but definitely have those weekly. Don't wait a month to have a monthly business review to kind of discuss that. Create a cadence that is much higher frequency than once a month. It gives you simply 42 times to course correct and, spot a mistake versus 4 times if you only do a quarterly review, for example. Then a retrospective. Think about that. Product folks, when they finish their cycle, sometimes they do it per cycle, sometimes they do it a bit later, they do a retrospective. And that retrospective is not about, okay, you delivered late, bad, you delivered fast, good, and now move on. This is a conversation that you're having with the team in order to understand what went well, what didn't go so well, what should we be learning from, what should we be doing differently going forward, and really create this as a you know, I see it many times when people do like QBRs in that sense. They create kind of a blame game for them, right? It's kind of, oh, you know, you messed this up, and therefore next time, try not do that. If you get into the blaming thing, what's going to happen is everyone's defense is going to go up, and no one is going to share actual learnings. And, you know, I hate to be this, you know, people need to be vulnerable. But yes, you know, in order for a team to learn and understand and see what's going on, you need to share stuff that you know, you screwed up at. And maybe that wasn't even the data. Maybe no one knew that you screwed up, but actually maybe that was a great learning. So you need to create a forum where it's okay to bring these things up. And then lastly, we call it cycle planning. Yeah? And cycle planning, so by the way, revenue, retrospective, cycle planning, those two things I would probably do on the quarterly level. Depends a little bit on your pace in the organization, but quarterly is probably okay. What you should be doing and thinking about is to not have one QBR to discuss the past and the future, split those two things, just like product does. They have one thing focused on the past, and they have one thing focused on the future. And that, you know, the cycle planning or revenue planning or however, you know, we haven't locked in on what that name should be, but basically start implementing the learnings maybe from the retrospective and start implementing some of the fresh data coming in, right? So I see that all the time. So some folks call it rebaselining. That's kind of actually what I mean. So let's just say your conversion rate increased in some part of the funnel. You should say like, okay, that's our new baseline, because otherwise all the targets for everyone down here in the funnel will be, you know, too easy to hit. It will be, you know, will not be challenging. But also the reverse needs to be possible and feasible when conversion rates are going down, ACVs are going down, sales cycles are pushing out. Basically what's happening right now, right? And it's still happening across the board, and I'm sure Jaco talked exactly about that. But, you know, having a baseline that is 6 months old from someone in finance thinking X, Y, Z should happen, that might not be true anymore. And if you try and execute that plan, you might be demotivating everyone, and everyone's like, yeah, whatever, plan target. And you don't want to be there. So do some adjustments on a quarterly level in order to kind of move forward. And with adjustments, you also need flexibility on the budget. That's just really super important, right? And by the way, I've kind of banging on this budgeting thing a lot. I think it's absolutely necessary. You know, don't be illusional and think like, oh, you know, we can live without a budget. No, you totally need that, but you need something else to at least supplement on the go-to-market side. So some of you folks were saying, okay, cool, nice theory, Toni. Thank you very much. You don't have any skin in my game. Why should I be listening to some of this, right? And really, this is where, and that's why I have kind of the RevOps or die piece here again. This is where I really think this kind of fits into this theme a lot. So number one, why should you care? Agile is, you know, by now a proven way to optimize resource allocation, meaning customer acquisition costs in this sense, right? You might have some cost in cost of goods sold and something else, but Agile is the best way to figure this out because you take the latest data, the latest understanding, and from that, you plot the best course forward. And at the same time, so this is the cost saving side. You know, this is what I mentioned in the beginning. This is the cost saving side, but you have the same effect actually on the revenue acquisition side as well, right? So if you have city targets, and I hope you don't, if you have city targets, you know, you can do whatever. You know, Agile is not going to help you with that, right? So you still won't hit them. But what I can promise you is if you kind of follow this approach, you will get as close as humanly possible, right? You will find a way to get closer to this thing, you know, instead of, you know, following the past approach and, you know, doing the same thing and, you know, not changing anything, you will probably end up lower, right? So kind of doing this will probably help you to hit targets. And then I think this is really relevant for this audience here is if this is your mindset, you know, how can you optimize CAC? How can you drive revenue? If this is your mindset, the organization simply will not see you anymore as, you know, this system admin thing. And I think every one of us kind of wants to be outside of that. Sure, we love our Salesforce instance, we love HubSpot or whatever we're kind of doing here. But at the end of the day, we joined this thing not to do tweaks in the CRM all the day, but we actually wanted to kind of have an impact, right? And focusing on revenue, focusing on cost with this approach, you will have an impact. I can promise you that. So then the flip side to that is obviously like, geez, Toni, lots of stuff to see here, lots of stuff to understand, but how would I even get started? I mean, you know, do you want really to, you know, me to go to finance and tell them about revenue road mapping and then see what happens? No. I don't want to say I tried that. I got there eventually, but using this approach that I, you know, wanted to share with you. Number one, try and start introducing a quarterly retrospective. Call it a QBR to keep it more familiar with the folks around the table. Focus maybe on your business unit, focus maybe on your direct manager, focus on your region maybe. Kind of start small. Create a deck looking back at the last quarter, go through your funnel steps, understand what went well, what didn't go so well, and, you know, have that as a data backdrop to the conversation to say like, okay, what could we have done better, right? Kind of use that. Then try and take that data and that learning and adjust, you know, and maybe this is just you and the VP or something like that. It doesn't need to be rolled out to everyone's commission checks, but try and adjust the operational goals that you set across the GTM. Obviously, it shouldn't be, you know, veering completely off the track from what you have in your budget, but try and adjust it a little bit. And when I say adjusting, maybe you see something is working well in marketing, maybe you give them a bit more, maybe you see something is not working well on sales development, maybe you take a bit out, right? And then lastly, use those updated operational goals to drive the weekly conversation. Yeah. And now they're non-bullshit targets anymore. At that point, they're non-BS targets. You can have clear conversation with your departmental leaders. You can punk them if they're not fulfilling this. But what they will not be able to do is to say like, well, those targets were invented 8 months ago. They don't really apply to me. I'll just go and do whatever I want. I've been in all of those spots in both cases from both sides, by the way. So I know exactly kind of how that sometimes works. Okay. I'm just having a quick look at the clock, and I think I have a minute left, and that actually leaves me also with my last slide here. So on board. You guys are absolutely awesome, and thanks for having me here.
Thanks, Toni. We have, I think we need to shoot this question here because we can allow us at least one question. In my experience, RevOps teams are rarely empowered as product teams are to protect the roadmap with constant scope and creep. Incoming urgent requests from leadership. Any tips here?
Yeah, start being clear on what that roadmap actually is. So when you really think about a product, they are very clear. That's the roadmap. If you put something in, you got to put and take something out. And I don't think that we on the RevOps side are as clear on that. And I think, you know, once you create this, if you want to put something in, something goes out. If you are better on that, I think suddenly for people are like, oh, wait a minute, this is not a bottomless pit where I can just, you know, throw stuff in. Suddenly it has a consequence. Start by doing that.
Yeah, great. Thanks a million. Thanks for the great presentation. We are really looking forward to partnering with you again in September. Have a great day. We're moving to the next one.
Ivan, have a good one. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.